Imagine this. You're the President of the United States. You're sitting alone in the Oval Office late at night staring at a world map. Not the colorful political one people see on TV, but the cold, strategic map. Shipping routes, missile ranges, satellite paths, and choke points. And something feels wrong. Your rivals are moving faster than expected. China is locking up supply chains. Russia is expanding Arctic patrols. The ice at the top of the world is melting faster than anyone predicted. And right there in your strategic backyard sits a massive island, frozen, underdeveloped, ignored. So you ask a question that sounds insane to everyone else. How much? In 2019, when Donald Trump suggested buying Greenland, the world erupted in laughter. Media outlets treated it like a joke. Denmark called it absurd. Late-night comedians had weeks of content. But here's the truth most people missed. Trump wasn't joking. And even more important, he wasn't original. The United States has been trying to acquire Greenland for over 100 years. This wasn't a random idea. It wasn't a meme. It wasn't a publicity stunt. It was strategy. America's interest in Greenland goes back to the 1860s, right after the U.S. bought Alaska. At the time, buying territory wasn't controversial. It was how empires expanded. Greenland wasn't seen as ice. It was seen as position. A massive piece of land sitting between North America, Europe, and Russia. A natural fortress. A control point over the North Atlantic. That's why President Truman made a formal offer in 1946. $100 million in gold bullion. Not dollars. Gold. Denmark said no. But here's the part most people don't understand. America never walked away. Instead, it adapted. By 1951, the U.S. secured permanent military access to Greenland, radar stations, early warning systems, air bases. The foundation was laid quietly. So when Trump revived the idea decades later, insiders didn't laugh. They understood exactly what he was pointing at. Because this story is not about buying land. It's about what happens when geography becomes destiny. As ice melts, new shipping routes open. As technology advances, distance becomes reaction time. As global power shifts, old maps become irrelevant. Greenland is no longer frozen space. It's the center of the next great power contest. And while the public laughed, the Pentagon was recalculating missile trajectories. Supply chain planners were looking at rare Earth deposits, and intelligence agencies were watching the Arctic light up. This video isn't about America collapsing. It isn't about panic. And it isn't about predictions. It's about why the world's most powerful country keeps coming back to the same frozen island, again and again. And to understand why Greenland matters so much, we need to talk about one brutal truth. In geopolitics, location beats ideology every time. To understand why Greenland keeps pulling America back, you have to forget modern headlines and go back to a time when global power was decided by maps, not markets. In the 19th century, the United States was still learning how empires worked. And one man understood it better than most, William Seward. He's remembered today for one thing, buying Alaska in 1867. At the time, people mocked it as Seward's folly, a frozen wasteland, a waste of money. History proved otherwise. Alaska became one of the most strategically valuable acquisitions in modern history. Oil, minerals, military reach, and control over the North Pacific. And here's what almost no one talks about. Alaska was never meant to be the end. After that purchase, Seward commissioned studies exploring Greenland and even Iceland. Why? Because Seward understood something timeless. If you control the North Atlantic gateways, you control trade, security, and future wars. Greenland wasn't about expansion for pride. It was about locking down choke points. Fast forward to World War II. Suddenly, Greenland stopped being theoretical. When Nazi Germany occupied Denmark in 1940, the U.S. stepped in to protect Greenland. Airstrips were built, weather stations were installed, radar sites quietly appeared. By the end of the war, American planners had learned a critical lesson. Greenland wasn't just useful, it was irreplaceable. That's why in 1946, President Harry Truman made a formal offer to Denmark, $100 million in gold. This wasn't diplomacy, it was valuation. Denmark refused, not because the offer was small, but because selling Greenland would redefine sovereignty itself. But again, America didn't leave. In 1951, a defense agreement gave the U.S. permanent military access to Greenland. This wasn't temporary basing. This was a long-term strategic foothold, and it still exists today. The base once known as Thule Air Base, now called Patuxent Space Base, is one of the most important early warning installations in the world. Missile detection, space surveillance, radar tracking. All of it runs through Greenland. So when people say, why is the U.S. suddenly interested in Greenland? The answer is simple. It never stopped being interested. What changed wasn't America's desire. It was the stakes. During the Cold War, Greenland was about nuclear warning time. Today, it's about something bigger. Arctic shipping routes, missile defense, rare earth supply chains, space dominance, and containment of China and Russia. Greenland sits at the intersection of all of it. This is why every generation of American leadership eventually circles back to the same thought, not because Greenland is for sale, but because power shifts north as ice disappears. And that leads us to the most uncomfortable reality of all. In geopolitics, geography doesn't care about public opinion. And the most important geography on Earth right now is frozen land that's starting to thaw. If you want to understand why Greenland matters more than almost any place on Earth, you don't start with politics, you start with a map. Look at the North Atlantic and you'll notice something strange. There's only one narrow corridor connecting the Arctic and the open Atlantic Ocean. It's called the GIUK Gap. Greenland, Iceland, United Kingdom, three landmasses forming a natural choke point, one that every Russian submarine must pass through to reach the Atlantic. In military strategy, choke points are everything. If you control them, you don't need to dominate the entire ocean. You only need to dominate the gate. During the Cold War, NATO treated the GIUK Gap as a kill zone. Underwater sensors, sonar arrays, patrol aircraft. The goal wasn't combat, it was early detection. Because in modern warfare, distance equals reaction time. A missile launched from deep inside Russia gives the US minutes to respond. A missile launched closer cuts that time in half. And Greenland sits right in the middle of that equation. This is why Greenland is often called an unsinkable aircraft carrier. You can't torpedo it. You can't move it. You can't sanction it away. It's fixed, massive, and perfectly positioned. From northern Greenland, radar systems can monitor North America, Europe, Russia, space above them all. That's not geography. That's leverage. This is why Thule Air Base, now Patuxent Space Base, is not just a military base. It's a pillar of America's missile warning architecture, ballistic missile detection, satellite tracking, space domain awareness. If a launch happens anywhere in the northern hemisphere, Greenland sees it first. Now here's the part most civilians never consider. This isn't just about Russia anymore. China has entered the Arctic, not with warships, but with investments, ports, research stations, fiber optic cables, mining partnerships. China openly calls its strategy the Polar Silk Road. Why? Because melting ice is rewriting global trade. New shipping routes through the Arctic can cut 10 to 15 days off Asia-Europe transit. That's not convenience, that's dominance. Whoever controls the infrastructure around those routes controls the toll booth of future global trade. And Greenland sits right next to those gateways. This is where military logic meets economic reality. You can't separate them anymore. Missile defense needs radar. Radar needs territory. Territory needs political access. And political access depends on influence. Which brings us to the next escalation. Because Greenland isn't just strategically valuable above ground. It's valuable under the ice. As glaciers retreat, something else is being revealed. Not water, but minerals. Rare earths, critical metals, strategic materials. And that opens a completely different battlefield. For most of history, Greenland was dismissed as empty, too cold, too remote, too expensive. But that assumption was built on ice, and the ice is disappearing. As Arctic temperatures rise, Greenland is revealing what was hidden for thousands of years, one of the largest untapped reserves of rare earth minerals on the planet. These aren't optional resources. Rare earths power modern civilization. They are essential for smartphones, electric vehicles, wind turbines, fighter jets, missile guidance systems, satellites, advanced radar. Without them, modern militaries don't function. And here's the uncomfortable truth Washington can't ignore. China controls 80 to 90% of global rare earth processing. Not mining, processing. That distinction matters, because even if rare earths are mined elsewhere, they are often shipped to China to be refined, which means supply chains run through Beijing. That's not an economic problem, that's a national security vulnerability. In a crisis, supply chains don't fail politely, they get weaponized. This is why Greenland suddenly looks different. Washington doesn't see ice, it sees an escape route, a way to diversify supply, a way to break dependence, a way to avoid being cornered. And China sees the same thing. Over the past decade, Chinese companies have aggressively pursued mining projects in Greenland. Not loudly, not militarily, quietly, joint ventures, infrastructure funding, research partnerships. Because China understands something most people miss. You don't need to conquer territory to control it. You just need to become economically indispensable. This is where the Arctic Cold War becomes real. No tanks, no troops, no headlines, just contracts. But minerals aren't the only secret under the ice. In 1959, the United States built Camp Century, an underground city carved directly into the Greenland ice sheet. Officially, it was a research station. Unofficially, it was something else entirely. Project Iceworm, a classified plan to hide hundreds of nuclear missiles inside thousands of miles of ice tunnels. The idea was terrifyingly simple. Mobile launch sites, hidden from satellites, protected by ice, close enough to reduce reaction time. The project failed, not because of politics, but because the ice moved. Too unstable, too unpredictable. Camp Century was abandoned in 1967 and left behind radioactive waste, chemical contaminants, infrastructure entombed in ice. Today, as the ice melts, those remnants are resurfacing, which creates a paradox. The same climate change making Greenland strategically valuable is also exposing the environmental cost of past military ambition. But Washington isn't thinking about the past. It's thinking about the future. Because rare earths plus geography equals leverage, and leverage is the currency of global power. This is why Greenland is not just about defense. It's about who controls the inputs of the next technological era. Energy transition, weapons systems, space infrastructure. Whoever secures Greenland's resources doesn't just gain materials, they gain options. And in geopolitics, options are everything. But there's one final complication. Greenland isn't just land, it's people. And their future is the most delicate pressure point of all. Here's the part most geopolitical analysis gets wrong. Greenland is not just ice, minerals, or military positioning. It's people, and people complicate power games. Greenland today is self-governing, but not independent. Roughly half of its annual budget, about $600 million, comes from Denmark. That money keeps the system running: healthcare, education, infrastructure. Without it, Greenland cannot function as a modern state. And yet, many Greenlanders want independence. Not because they want to join another empire, but because they want control over their own future. This creates a trap. Independence requires money. Money requires a partner. And partners come with conditions. Denmark provides funding but limits strategic autonomy. China offers investment, but brings long-term dependency. The United States offers security, but expects alignment. This is the real contest. Not who buys Greenland, but who becomes Greenland's lifeline. Because whoever replaces Denmark's funding becomes indispensable. And indispensable influence doesn't need ownership. It needs leverage. This is why Washington's strategy has shifted. The language has changed. In early 2026, the White House confirmed it is exploring all options to secure Greenland as a national security priority, not as a purchase, as a necessity. That matters, because this isn't a business deal. It's a structural escalation. Denmark insists Greenland is not for sale. Europe echoes that position. But geopolitics doesn't wait for permission. It moves through incentives. And here's the uncomfortable reality. Greenland's infrastructure is underdeveloped. There are no intercity roads. Everything moves by air or sea. Modernizing Greenland would cost hundreds of billions of dollars. Denmark can't afford that alone. Greenland can't afford it at all. But the United States can. And China can. Which means the real question is no longer if pressure increases, but who absorbs the cost first. This is why 2026 matters. Not because a war starts, not because a treaty is signed, not because headlines explode, but because the balance shifts. More military investment, more infrastructure funding, more strategic signaling. And once that process begins, it doesn't reverse, because Greenland is not valuable today. It's valuable tomorrow, as shipping lanes open, as ice retreats, as resource access expands, as reaction times shrink. The Arctic is becoming the new frontier of power. And history is clear about one thing. When frontiers open, competition follows. But here's the final truth, the one most people avoid. The biggest risk in Greenland isn't America, China, or Denmark. It's repetition. Empires don't fall because they expand. They fall because they overcommit to maintaining dominance in a world that's already changing. Britain learned that lesson too late, not when the pound collapsed, but when defending it became too expensive. The United States isn't buying Greenland, it's trying to buy time. Time to secure supply chains, time to control geography, time to delay decline. Whether that works or not depends on something far more fragile than ice: trust. Because once trust becomes conditional, every move becomes more expensive. And Greenland is where that cost is starting to surface. The ice is melting, not just revealing land, revealing intent, revealing pressure, revealing a future where power is decided far north, long before the rest of the world realizes what changed. That's the real Arctic Cold War. Quiet, strategic, already underway. And now that you've seen the pattern, you'll notice it everywhere.